That looks okay. Let's go back to system.js. I just want to see what we need to make sure that this will render. We need the should animate property be true. So while the animation is running, we want to be able to still access this block. So let's go into player components, animation, go to should animate. We'll set that to true. And now let's see what we have. Okay. So Link strikes the pose. He does the animation. However, we have two problems. The first problem is that he does not come out of it, so there must be an issue with our ending logic, that if statement. And the second issue is the sword looks really weird. I think we just have a misalignment on the source rectangle. So why don't we go back and we will fix the source rectangle first. Let's take a look at the Link PNG again. We can look at this. So I'm going to guess and say we need to actually go down a bit further on this sprite sheet. Let's go back and check. I put in 190 for the Y. And there the sword is. Although it's very small, we're getting the sword. Let's change around the height and the width. Let's make it a little bit wider and a little bit taller. Let's see what it looks like now. Okay, we're getting better. It's still a very little sword. Why don't I make it much longer? I'll do 60 height. I'll leave the width the same. Okay, it's not bad. I'll just put it to the side right here. How about we even do it to 75 height? I actually like that a little bit more. Let's make it wider. Okay, I like how that looks. Let's move it up slightly. Move it up by a few pixels. Actually, we need to move it. We need to subtract 35 to move it up. See, a lot of this is a bit trial and error. If I was able to find good sprite sheets that were proportioned out properly, it would have been slightly better with this part, but you work with what you got. And it's not too bad. Let's move it over to the right a bit more. Oop. To the right means less, actually. Okay, that's on his hand, right? That's not too bad. Shift the pixels down a little bit more. Cool. Now it looks like he's actually holding it by the handle. That looks good. I like that. Now you guys play around with it. If you want it to look exactly like the sword model, you can go ahead and do that. I personally like how this looks, so I'm going to keep it like that. I might just make it slightly less wide. Yeah, I like it like that. I think that looks good. So cool. That's our first problem. And our second problem was that we are not exiting the animation. So obviously there is an issue with this if statement. The end time is, or the date now is never greater than the end time. I have a feeling that means that the end time is also incrementing, even though it's taking this timestamp, which makes sense because actually this Link pickup sword, if we go into the system, let's go into the action system. What I'm pretty sure is happening right here is that since Link, that tile, that sword tile that Link is hovering over, is constantly intersecting with Link because we haven't removed it. So this update function is constantly getting called because they intersect, which pushes this event, which fires this. So we're constantly running this animation. and link is frozen in that place. That's my hypothesis. And I think the way we fix it is by removing that tile, the tile that has the sword, and we do the replacement. So if you remember, I actually had predicted this was going to, well, not this specific issue, but I did say earlier that we would need to get rid of the original tile, and that's why we were passing this ID property to the link pickup sword function. And what we're going to do is we're simply going to, right after the replacement tile is created, let's do delete the original tile. And we're going to do player registry, and we can say remove entity by ID, and we pass the ID. Now we don't actually have this function yet, so let's go into the registry class and let's create this function. Now we can handle this in one of two ways. One, we can loop through every single system, go through every single entity within the system, and determine if the entity has that ID to remove it from the system. That's actually a bit cumbersome for what we needed to do. Now, both of these methods would actually be great methods to have in a big game, and perhaps we'll code out a general one later. But for right now, what I want to do is I actually just want to have a second parameter with the system that we would like to remove the entity from. So let's go and we will create this function, entity by ID. We'll make the first parameter ID and the second parameter system type. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the system. So this system's system type, and we'll loop through the entities. So for let I is equal to 0 is less than system entities dot length. And what I want to do now is if the ID is equal to, and actually let's just get the specific entity system entities I is equal to entity.id, remove the entity, right? Removing the entity is a little bit tricky with an array because what's going to happen is if this entity is in the middle of the array, we can remove it, but then there's going to be this blank empty value that will exist in the array. And that's not good coding because although we're not dealing with a large number of entities, when you have a huge system and you just leave empty spaces in arrays that have no values, you're actually creating kind of a memory leak where you're using up more and more memory and you're not doing anything with it. And those kinds of techniques, those kind of bad techniques, will impact performance. So what we actually want to do is we want to set the system entities to well, we're going to splice out the entity that has the same ID, and then we're going to kind of concatenate both halves of the array to form a new entities array. Up front, this actually is a bit of a costly operation to perform, but as a game grows larger and larger, this is a better technique than to just have memory leaks in your application like this. So system.entities, splice. And how splice works is we'll start at 0. We'll take from the beginning of the array until the place where the element is that we want to remove, which we can find by just placing I here. And then we'll concatenate from I on, or actually from I plus 1, so we'll skip over that. And what happens is, let's say we have an array like this, and we want to get rid of C. We essentially, what we're doing is we're splicing from 0 until 0, 1, 2. And it will not take C, it'll just take A and B because it's the splice argument, the second argument, is actually just asking us for the number of elements it wants to take. So it'll take out A and B. And then we concatenate from 2 plus 1, which is 3, and this will be 3, until the end. And actually, I just realized I need to concatenate. I need to make a longer statement than that. It needs to, again, be system entities splice. And we'll concatenate the resulting array from this to this array. And what I'm going to do is I will do console.log out entity, or actually system entities before system entities, and then we'll just do an after to determine that what I'm doing is right. Okay. Remove entity by ID. Okay. Now let's see how this looks. If we get any errors. Okay. And here, let's try that again. Nothing is being console logged out. So something is not working properly. We're passing the actionable system and the ID. I know for certain that actionable system is the correct type. So I'm assuming we're getting system, but for some reason, perhaps we're not getting or maybe we're not getting the proper ID. Let me console.log out ID. Let's see what we get. ID is undefined. Okay, so ID is not being properly passed from index.js. ID is right here. This registry, num of entities. Is that the name of the property? Number of entities. Okay. Number of entities. Now it should work properly. Let's try this again. Entities before and entities after. Okay, so very cool. Okay. So the entity is properly being removed from that system. However, the sword is still displaying, and that's because we're only removing it from one entity, or from one system rather. So let's also remove it from the render system. And after we remove it from the render system, I'm going to want to push it into the entities to be removed array of the registry. So why don't we also return this array, or return this entity, and we'll just take it from here. Const entity is equal to player registry. Do player registry entities to be removed, and we can push it right in. Because now we don't need to do this with everything, but I have a feeling that we may have situations in the future where if we remove it from 2 of the systems it's supposed to be in, we may want to just get rid of all the systems that it has to be in. And we might want to do this to remove it from multiple systems. Let's change this to render system as well, because I copy pasted that. Okay. And that looks good. Let me check this. Okay, splice is not the right method. It's actually slice. I'm sorry, I get those mixed up sometimes. Splice will alter the array in place, while slice takes just a shallow copy of it to perform its actions on. I think that's better. Let me save that. Let's go back to our game. Cool. And that's what we want. That looks good. We'll refresh it again, just make sure. Link is still running. We can easily fix that by setting the should animate to false when this is over, but that looks good. I like it. Let me do a different direction. Yep. And then all we need to do, so let's remove the sword once the animation is complete. We'll take this sword entity, end the animation. Looks like we're already pushing this to be removed. Okay, so we'll fix that issue in a little bit. And then let's just set player components animation should animate to false. Let's see how that works now. Okay, he's holding that pose maybe too long. Let's go back. So we're setting the animation to false. Since it's the should animate is set to false, if we go to our system, let's check out how our animation system is working. It's only running if it's set to true, so actually the animation system is not really having any effect. However, our render system controls when Link is not moving, or at least it's rendering Link. Yeah, it's rendering Link when he's not moving. So you know what we actually need to do is we need to change this src rect directly as well. So let's go into player components sprite src rect. And let's actually just set this equal to src rect and the first frame of that. Let's see how that looks now. He does the animation, and then he returns to normal. Everything works properly. Now, the final piece of the puzzle, let's get rid of that entity, the floating sword that is just in the middle of the screen. So just like we were handling the entities to be added, let's go through the entities to be removed. And this remove entity from system. We're going to create this entities to be removed, set it to an empty array. We are going to create this method. We'll put it right here, remove entity from system, and we'll take an entity. So what we want to do now is remove this entity from every system. So we need to loop through all the systems. So let's just do this. We'll go let I is equal to 0, or actually, we don't even need to use this kind of for loop. We'll loop through the this system's property, and then for each system, we're going to essentially filter out the specific entity from its entities. So we can do something like system entities filter. We can take advantage of JavaScript's filter function. If the entity ID, or let's change the name of this, if sys entity ID does not equal the entity ID that we're trying to remove, then we can put it back into the system. And I think that should be good. Let's console.log this out. Console.log entity. Yep. Very nice. It's a fluid animation. It disappears right when it's supposed to.